Hi, everyone, and welcome back to another insightful case study review for this year's Trender Southeast Asia report by Zalora. Now, as we all know, this region is a melting pot of diverse cultures and religions, but did you know Islam is actually the most widely practiced religion here? In a study by Cornell University, Southeast Asia is home to one-fifth of the world's Muslim population, spread across countries like Brunei, Indonesia, Malaysia, as well as southern Thailand and parts of Mindanao and the Philippines. Now, that's actually quite a huge amount to behold, and it's really no wonder retailers are scurrying in to zero into this increasingly influential demographic. Now, with that in mind, I'm pleased to welcome along Fazal Bahadin, CEO of Crescent Rating, the world's first halal travel and tourism rating system. Welcome, Fazal. How's everything going on your end?
Thanks, Amy. Thanks for having me in the show. Everything is good. Looking forward to our chat.
Yeah, fantastic to hear. Now, let's just dive straight into it. And for the benefit of those who don't already know, tell us how Crescent Rating works to provide better understanding on the Muslim market.
Yeah. So Crescent Rating, we actually started in 2008. Actually, our only focus is basically to enable destinations or businesses to be able to cater to the Muslim travelers around the world. So we basically help destinations or businesses in terms of understanding the market through a number of things that we do in terms of, we do research reports and all that. We help them, develop capabilities and capacity through the work that we do with them. We also have a rating system to rate travel services, especially hotels, so that the destination can benchmark their services on how well or not that they are catering to the Muslim market. And also we help destinations, particular destinations, also businesses, in terms of, reaching out to the Muslim market, in terms of helping them to market their services and products to the Muslim market. So these are the sort of three areas that we focus on. And that's what we have been doing for the last almost 12 to 13 years.
And I also assume this would have come from your own personal experience from travel and everything, because this has never happened before. This is a world's first, isn't it?
True. So I mean, it all started with I used to be in an MNC for a long time, and that made me to travel quite a bit around the world. And I mean, we are talking almost 10, 15 years ago. Traveling as a practicing Muslim to a certain extent. You have your pain points of finding your halal food and things like that. So that was the inspiration. So that sort of got me into thinking of how do I solve my problem, and at the same time probably help others to solve their problem in traveling. And that's how sort of I came about the idea initially, and that's how our name is actually called Crescent Rating, because the idea was to rate hotels, and that's how we got started in 2008. Of course, now we do a lot more than rating. I mean, rating is a part of our product portfolio, but when we started, that was really the intent, because my struggles were with the hotels. I used to spend like half of my life, the last 20, 30 years in hotels, and I struggled to sort of I mean, you have to do a lot of compromises, right? If you don't find halal food, then you have to bring your food along, so all kinds of stuff. So that was the inspiration to start off with a rating system to rate hotels on how Muslim friendly they are, which is how the name Crescent Rating comes. So Crescent Rating was sort of trying to map what Star Rating was doing. Star Rating, Crescent is a kind of slightly related to the Muslim community. And the idea was not to sort of replace Star Rating, but it was to sort of complement the Star Rating from a Muslim services point of view. So that was the inspiration, and of course we have come a long way since then.
Yeah, that's a very clever twist to the starter Crescent Rating. Now, you mentioned about struggles, but now we're kind of in a different kind of struggle. In which way or in what way has the Muslim market been affected since the pandemic? I think this is the key struggle that we're all facing here.
I think Muslim market is no different from any other market, whether it being travel or, I mean, of course, we are much more focused on travel, and the Muslim market has been, you know, impacted as all other markets. I mean, we just released our report, I think in July, and our estimate was the Muslim market, dropped from 160 million visitors in 2019 to 42 million in 2020, and that also, most of it happened in the first 3 months of 2020. So I think this, pandemic didn't make any discrimination against your color or your faith. Everybody was equally impacted. I think the question more is now, will there be any behavioral changes that we will see as we start traveling back, and what will those changes be? I think, will there be difference in changes, in behavioral changes with Muslim travelers versus the other travelers? I think that's probably the area that we are focusing on, and I think many of the travel industry also trying to come to grips with.
Yeah, I was actually going through the Global Muslim Travel Index. Now, with Malaysia in mind, we are actually, and I'm from, both of us from Malaysia right now, but Malaysia remains as a top ranked destination for Muslim travelers. Now, given the current travel restriction, how much travel has actually affected the retail market? Because there is a correlation there. I remember many, many years ago, I think KLCC, Surya KLCC, was one of the prime tourist destinations for visitors from the Emirates, from the Middle East primarily.
I think, retail is probably the most impacted, definitely, hugely impacted, right? I mean, retail in particular, and then in really the worst impacted probably is the eateries, eating establishments, which have been really impacted. So I think the impact has been severe, although on the positive side, I think a lot of transactions have gone online now. We are beginning to buy things online that we probably never dreamed or imagined that we would buy online, without physically touching and looking. So I think on the positive side, I think we are getting our comfort levels with online transactions have massively accelerated or increased, right? If you look 3 years ago, I mean, 4 years ago, QR codes came into, I don't know, maybe 8-9 years ago. It was almost dying off, like say 4-5 years ago. Now everybody knows, you and your grandfather knows probably what QR code is now. So I think, of course, the retail has hugely impacted, but our comfort levels with omni-channel probably is probably the right word, where people are getting much more comfortable, buying through whole touch points.
Yeah, absolutely. But what about economies? Because especially with travel, I know I was actually just reading a news piece about how much our own travel and tourism industry is so heavily connected to our own GDP. But with the Muslim market in mind, how reliant are we in terms of the economy on the Muslim market?
I think it is hugely reliant when it comes to travel in this part of the world. I think our studies show that almost 40+% of the intra-ASEAN travel is Muslim. I think 41 or 42%. And then domestic travel, I think about 20-30%, 20 or 25% are Muslim travelers. So I think, as you also mentioned in your introduction, ASEAN actually, 40% of ASEAN population are Muslims. So it's a huge population. Not whether it's travel or other consumer lifestyle areas. So I think the Muslim market, I mean, I keep saying that I think this part of the world definitely should look at the Muslim consumer market as a strategic market in terms of accelerating the economic recovery, because they are a huge consumer market in this part of the world.
Yeah, correct. Now, if such economies are heavily reliant on the Muslim markets, and given that the current state of the pandemic that we're in, how do you think retailers can also future-proof their businesses?
I think, if you look at, I think we have to sort of go back before pandemic, right? So if you go before pandemic, we have seen the last 4, 5, 6 years, the halal awareness has grown massively. I mean, one way to look at is the number of halal certified restaurants, for instance. In a place like Singapore, it has been continuously increasing for the last few years. We have seen more and more restaurants getting their halal certification. Same in this part of the world, in Malaysia, and same in Indonesia. So there has been a continuous increase in awareness of being able to find Muslim friendly services and products for Muslims. So I think that has been growing. You see in the travel market, you see that in the food market, you see a huge market which has which is in your territory, which is the modest fashion, which I think we'll come back to later. So I think if you look at that, of course, I think pandemic has sort of put a dent into the whole growth, but it's they will become as significant or even probably more significant as we go into the recovery and rebound phase after pandemic. So I think they are going to be a key player in the recovery phase.
Yeah, and like you mentioned, with fashion, modest wear, it's huge. It's an astounding product segment. Actually, I'm just going to pull up a very quick retail insight here that we actually got from Zalora, and that is 50% of categories share of sales in modest wear relative to other categories decreased by 50% compared to 2019, despite overall year-on-year sales increased by 400%. Now, with that in mind, why do you think there was a drop between purchases of modest wear in comparison to other retail categories? Do you think, more modest wear consumers are mixing and matching traditional wear with modest wear, or where is this consumer behavior kind of evolving from?
Yeah. Okay. So I think, maybe one of the reasons that you gave is probably people, Muslims, especially youngsters, are getting more innovative. They don't need to buy one piece probably of a dress. They could probably buy different things and put that together. But also, I think staying at home, you don't need a lot of things to sort of modest fashion. Of course, is all about we are talking about the female Muslim females who are going outside their houses, right? That's where you need this modest fashion, for a lack of a better word. So I think that must have played a huge role. If other clothing has gone up, maybe they don't need that level of modest fashion because they are at home, so they could wear other types of clothing. So I think that could be also a key factor why if overall the consumption has gone up but that category has gone down, it doesn't mean that they have lost interest in the modest fashion. It means probably they are not. I mean, that was the case for this part of the world, right? Last 18 months, our going out has been very, very limited. We are not going to the office, for instance, So all that has, I think, even if you ask even if you ask me, I probably didn't buy a business shirt for the last, 18 months, So I think that probably has an impact as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, where do you think the Muslim consumer priorities have shifted to instead, in the larger picture, not just in fashion, but in the larger scheme of things?
I think if you look at some other things, I think they are of course getting more everything online, right? So when it comes to online consumption, we see an increase in what we call edutainment, in terms of both entertainment and educational area that has increased, especially when it comes to more faith-based educational areas that has increased. And I think overall, when it comes to, I think that also we have seen that before as well, and that was a trend, not just in the Muslim community, but overall in the community, that we have seen more empathy towards your community, taking care of your community, taking care of your environment. I think this, especially among younger Muslims travelers, we have seen that growth. I think that is probably going to play a much more important role as we get back our economies, growing. So I think those kind of things, in terms of being much more responsible, when it comes to wellness, your own personal development, I think that's where sort of edutainment comes in. So I think those areas are beginning to play a increased role, which we have seen before as well. But I think the pandemic has sort of accelerated that, I believe.
Great. I mean, I'm a huge supporter of like the environment and the social responsibility, and I do agree. I think a lot of the millennials and Gen Zs, I guess even boomers, across the board, everyone is just really aware.
Absolutely, because you see, we have seen the last we have seen the last 2-3 weeks. There are fires ravaging. Forests are getting destroyed. You have even in places like Germany, floods which are destroying the places. So I think it's the environmental destruction that we are doing is real, and I think the younger population, younger Muslims, and not only Muslims, as you say, Gen Z, millennials, and even people like us, we are beyond the baby boomers as well. We are getting, we have to contribute to the safeguarding the environment.
Yeah. Now, going back to fashion, I remember very vaguely there was a hijab, a Swarovski encrusted hijab, which was launched in 2019, and this kind of blew me away because I had no idea this was happening. So there was a hijab which was Swarovski encrusted by Bawal exclusive, and that was sold for 50,000 ringgit Malaysia. That's an equivalent to $10,000 if not more, Now, what do you think this tells us about the current Muslim consumer? I don't know whether it's changed now, but the fact that this happened very recently in 2019 blew my mind.
I think hijab is becoming almost a personality statement or even a fashion statement, contrary to what some parts of the world believe, that it is an oppression against women or something. It's not the case. If somebody is able to sell $50,000 a hijab, it's not oppression, I believe, right? So I think there is this narrative some people want to build, that Muslim women are wearing this because they are being forced to, or because they have been oppressed. I mean that's definitely far from the truth. If you talk to many, peer pressure is always there. You sometimes, it doesn't have to be hijab. You have other dresses that you wear because of peer pressure, right? So I think that is there. But you can ask many women, they wear it because of it's a statement that they want to make. That they are, and actually most of them wear to show that they are really independent, going out, and they know what they're doing. So I think it's becoming, to some Muslims, it's a problem as well. It's almost a fashion statement. You have, we are not supposed to be wearing a $50,000 hijab. But I think it's really an area that we see that happening all over the world, that more and more women are becoming really independent. They are getting into the workforces. They are making their own decisions, and how they dress is their own decision to a large extent. And they want to make sure that they dress the way that they want, and display what they want.
Yeah, and there's actually so many designers, international designers as well. You're looking at Valentino, Dolce & Gabbana, and they're all really zeroing into the modest market, the Muslim market. And it's astounding, because I've worked with a few brands myself, and I've been styling on the side as well, with some of the brands who are like specifically targeting these consumers. And they're looking at Indonesia, they're looking at the Middle East, but primarily also Indonesia, because that's about 80% of the Muslim market in Southeast Asia. That's where the majority of them reside, if I'm not mistaken.
Absolutely, yeah. Almost 200 plus million, so yes.
Yeah, that's quite a huge number. So, do you think retailers can still benefit with all that's happening right now? Do you think retailers can still benefit to attract Muslim consumers as they did before the pandemic?
Definitely no. I think it will be much more. I just talked to someone else as well on this same topic. I think, and I keep saying this as a mantra now, I think, especially in Southeast Asia, Muslim market is a market segment that all businesses should look at seriously, because they are post pandemic, they are looking for more companies who understands their nuances, who understands their the likes and dislikes, and understand their faith based requirements and cater to these requirements. I think they are going to be a lot more choosy. They're going to be simply because there is a lot more choice available for them in the market. The awareness has increased a lot, and that has created more choices, and more choices mean more awareness. So I think it's both an opportunity and also definitely a segment to look at in terms of how you go forward in the recovery process.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned that, because I think one of the key issues that are currently facing a lot of retailers is trying to understand the Muslim market. And of course, that's where you come in, that's where Crescent Rating comes in. But what are the key aspects that businesses need to understand more about this, very influential demographic? What are they failing to understand, or what do they need to understand more?
Of course, we are not really specialized in all segments of the Muslim consumer market. Our specialization has been on the travel industry. So in the travel industry, we have been very focused on understanding what the Muslim traveler is looking for, and how they should cater to them, in terms of, when you travel, of course, you are looking for, halal food, your prayer facilities, your number of other things that we have, sort of that, and we continue to sort of research them and update them. And I think in other segments, I'm not really an expert on the other segments, but I'm sure there are nuances and all that, when you're trying to sell modest fashion and things like that. I think what that means is data is important. I think in terms of both behavioral data and your faith related data. Of course, there are so many, although we keep saying Muslim market and Muslim market and Muslim market, they are not a homogeneous market, of course, right? There are certain things which are which they share among the whole community, but there are also so many differences when it comes to age, from where they come from. So all that has an impact on their, let's say, what level of halalness they're looking for, or what level they're comfortable with when they're purchasing services and products. So I think each segment has to, I think this is probably a good time to really seriously do some consumer behavioral research on each of those different segments. I can unfortunately only talk about the travel segment when it comes to consumer behavior.
Yeah, actually, speaking of the travel section, I think diplomatic relations here, seem to also directly affect retailers. Like, for example, Turkey's foreign direct investment in Malaysia in 2015, that stood at $127 million US dollars, which in turn became the catalyst for Turkish designers to penetrate Malaysia through modest wear website modernisa.com. Now, how do you think the introduction of non-Southeast Asian Muslim brands will bring change to the Southeast Asian retail market, and particularly with the Muslim consumer preference?
Yeah, I think, in general, I think competition always helps, or always helps innovation. I think, good, healthy competition is always good for the industry. And from a competition point of view, I think that will probably prompt more good designers to come out of Southeast Asia. I mean, Southeast Asia has, good designers in Malaysia and Singapore, in Indonesia and Malaysia to a large extent. So I think that's one thing. I think also from a consumer point of view, when you're online, your brand loyalty, having brand loyalty is a huge challenge, right? Building brand loyalty is probably I would say probably one of the biggest challenges for online retailers, because online makes it, you are able to purchase from anywhere in the world, right? So I think, having, from a consumer point of view, I don't see, consumers being too worried about where the product comes from, as long as the product is good and can be, they can get it whether it's in a retail shop here or delivered online. So I think the challenge is really for the businesses. How do we as Southeast Asian fashion designers and businesses, how do we make sure the consumers here stay loyal or brand loyalty to their businesses. And I think it probably all businesses need some level of competition to keep them innovative.
Yeah, that's definitely for sure. Now, what differences do you see within the cultures from Indonesia, from Malaysia, if you see any like cultural nuances?
Definitely, as I said just before as well, we see that in the travel sector. Of course, that's where we are. So, let's take halal food, for instance. Halal food, everybody, whether you're Malaysian, whether you're Indonesian, whether you're coming from Saudi Arabia, you will still want halal food. But what type of halal food, what type of, your taste buds, what cuisine that you want to have when you travel will differ definitely, So I think there are. I gave a very, very easy example, but you have a lot more, So, for instance, if for some travelers from some countries, when they go to another country, how the level of assurance they want for halal is different. Some may be okay with certain level of assurance. Some may say, "Look, I really want you to show me halal certificate from your country authority or something." So I think there are such many differences across many so there are differences in how the culture has influenced their faith. Culture always influences where you come. Your culture influences how you behave. So I think the cultural influences, the level of education, of course the demographics, the younger people. Only good thing probably is the younger people are probably getting a lot more similar, I think, across the world. But even then, you still have to look at some of the differences that these demographics have.
Yeah, we're all on our phones, that's for sure. We're all on our Instagrams and our TikToks and all of that.
Absolutely.
And I don't know whether you're on Instagram or TikTok. You just never know, because I was talking to another guest, and we were talking about how they've also gone into live streaming, and it's an interesting thing to see how all these new technological advancements have appealed to not just the Gen Zs and millennials, but everyone across the board.
So I some of these platforms I don't use it personally, but since we run a business which we have to be engaged with, because especially because we have a consumer platform called Halal Trip. So I with my team, we are always trying to understand how people interact with TikTok, how consumers interact with Instagram, Facebook and all that. So it's not an easy thing. Like for instance, some time ago Snapchat was something big. I don't hear anything about Snapchat anymore. I don't know if it's still there or not. So I think it's also things are moving very fast. So from our point of view, our main focus is to stay on top of technology, because technology is moving so fast. Consumer behavior is getting impacted because the way that technology is moving fast. Either consumer behavior is impacting technology, or technology is impacting consumer behavior. But we as businesses have to keep track of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Great. Yeah. I think that's all that we have for today. We've already covered all the bases.
Thanks, Amy.
But thank you so much for this really wonderful interview, Fazal. A lot of really interesting points here being made.
Thanks a lot. Thanks for having me, Amy. Have a good day.
Likewise.